Hi, everyone. On the Zoom call, could you write in the chat whether or not this is coming through clearly for you? Oh, great. It looks like this is working. Super. Thank you.
Are you sure they can see the presentation?
They can see it. I'm share screening this particular program. I mean, this is the way it normally looks for me whenever I do that. So I mean, I'll ask them. Another question to everybody out there in the Zoom world. Just want to make sure you're able to see the screen that says National Aquarium Harbor Wetland. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. I wanted to double check that it actually got that. Sometimes it opens up a second window, and I didn't want you to be sharing the actual PowerPoint not in the presentation.
I think that you need to speak on that side so that they can also hear. So I think it's just going through my computer. But just, I don't even think it would do anything. It's not unmuted. It's still, I mean, it's not. Because I can never remember. That sounds about that you can use it. I can go to these to go. I think that's. I said it. Oh, that's right.
Anything else?
Oh dear, I have a charger.
Well, there are outlets right behind it.
We like living on the edge.
I'll start. It's like people are grabbing food and drink. Well, good luck.
Thank you so much.
Hello, Zoom world. How are you? This is Professor Lowe from General Community College's Architecture and Interior Design Department, which also houses landscape architecture and construction management. But for today, landscape architecture is going to be foregrounded because we have with us a guest from Ayers Saint Gross, design firm in Baltimore, Maryland. They've recently, within a year, I believe, completed the National Aquarium Harbor Wetland. And here with us today is Mel Schultz to represent the project and give a talk and a presentation about this really innovative new floating wetlands that is in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. Without further ado, I'm going to bring up Mel.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming today, and to everybody that's out there on the Zoom for coming, and also for answering all of our technical questions to make sure that we are up and running correctly. Totally appreciate that. So today, wanted to kind of walk you through a project that we just had, as Rob said, open in the right by the National Aquarium, that is the floating wetland, and it really started a number of years ago as a campus-wide vision that then was tested for about 5 years as a prototype. And from the findings of that testing was adapted into a larger scale project that is really rooted in habitat, ecological performance, and also public spaces for the Baltimore community. So I trust that probably many of you have been to Baltimore at one point or another, but just to kind of put us into context, when you think about Baltimore, we are at the very bottom of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It's a huge watershed that kind of goes all the way up into New York, as you can see on the slide from the left. And the National Aquarium here on the right is highlighted in yellow. The National Aquarium on their campus for years, and through even whenever you go inside the aquarium, has always had sections of their exhibits that focus on the habitats of the National Aquarium and the aquatic animals that, the habitats of the Chesapeake and the aquatic animals that are found there. And so for them, this was an opportunity to expand that to the exterior of their campus as well. And as you may know from being in Baltimore, it is a urban environment. There are more regularly fish kills that happened in the Inner Harbor. If you've ever been up there after it happens, it's like, it's happening because it smells horrible. It's horrendous to look at. This is a picture that was taken right outside the National Aquarium. So very off brand of everything they're trying to do in their mission of this institution. Right outside of their door was the complete opposite. So this project really was an intention to both educate people, but also to remediate the problems at the footstep of their doorstep. And it comes as no surprise that what I'm about to talk to you about today is a floating wetland that really restores salt marsh habitat, which was the native, ecology that existed in Baltimore pre, Western development. But over time, as Baltimore, went into the Industrial Revolution, was built out, like the ecological health that once was, this beautiful wetland has completely declined. And if you think about the Inner Harbor and walking around there, the Inner Harbor has, you have the promenade and it has flat edges. There is no, it basically, you're walking and then there's a big long, drop into water. There is no living edge at the water's edge in the Inner Harbor itself. And so this was a way to bring back a living ecology, but without relying on land to do that. Just to kind of show how much the harbor has changed. This is a map, as you can see on the screen, from 1792. It's a historic map. I want you to look here, if you can. That's Charles Street. If you can kind of having spent, and I'm going to try to do this so the people on Zoom could potentially see me. So Charles Street is where the water of the harbor, and this is even after some Western development in 1792 used to be. This is a overlaid of how much infill has happened at the harbor over time. And so this is the edge of the water now. And it goes, as you know from visiting there, the whole way over to Calvert Street. And so all of that is how much man has changed what this environment over the time. And it has had an impact. You saw the fish kill, that image that I showed you earlier. And so one of the fundamental goals that we had from the National Aquarium was to really look at the few animals and aquatic animals that were able to survive in the Inner Harbor now, and to expand that, and not just to expand that for the aquatic animals, but also to expand it for the birds and other types of animals. But something like this is a pretty big thing to undertake. In really conditions that you don't have a huge amount of control beyond your immediate sight of what's happening in the waterways. And so it's taken a long time. And I wanted to kind of pause and say that our involvement in this project started right here at the beginning of the Waterfront Campus Plan in 2015. But the National Aquarium was doing floating wetland prototypes from 2011. So they have been doing this work for, almost just over 20 years. Those influenced our initial work in the Waterfront Campus Plan, and this prototype that I mentioned that is still in the water and surviving today. And our project, which is sort of the culmination of all of this study, was a very fast-paced in this long sort of stretch of time. It was a 2-year design and installation project that started at the beginning of 2022 and opened last summer. And so here's another way to look at that timeline. And the reason I included this one is to kind of look at it and how it spanned what the greater Baltimore was doing as well. So those blue circles in there kind of indicate whenever Baltimore, not just the National Aquarium, but this became like a real talking subject from the Waterfront Partnership and other organizations. The Healthy Harbor Initiative was launched back in 2010. You can see that 2000 and, my goodness, I need glasses. I cannot read these dates on here with you guys. In 2015, the National Aquarium did a framework plan for their interior campus, which Studio Gang led, and then they had us do their exterior campus, and which we led. And then this all is happening with all these different prototypes of different kinds of floating wetlands that were, some were more and some were less successful. And then at the same time, there have been great, I would say like dramatic increases in water quality in the Inner Harbor in general outside of this project that are an outcome of that work that Waterfront Partnership did and all of the investments that have been made. Because back last year was, I think you may have seen it in the news, was whenever people were first able to go and have the first swim in the harbor itself. So all these things kind of go hand in hand, but there's still a lot of work to be done, but a lot of good stuff has happened. And those prototypes that the National Aquarium was working on for years, these are some images of them. They were very small in scale. They were kind of like putting out, a cocoa mat and some growing medium and putting it out into the water. They were great for, 3 or 4 years, but essentially any floating wetland like that, as it grows, it gains biomass, both the stuff you see above the water, as well as everything that's happening underneath the water. If you can kind of take that and double it, it has just as many roots as what's above it. And they would sink under their own weight. So for the National Aquarium, investing in a large scale wetland didn't make sense if they knew it was going to be gone in 5 to 10 years. So that happened. And as I mentioned, Studio Gang did a study of their interior buildings. And when they were there, in a very Studio Gang way, they had this idea of looking at the slip between Piers 3 and Piers 4, where the 2 pavilions are that house the National Aquarium now, and rethinking it as a Chesapeake Bay wetland. So that happened. And they engaged us to look at their entire campus to develop a waterfront campus plan. And the waterfront campus plan included this idea of this floating wetland that had, kept the kind of that salt marsh in the middle of the slip here. But it also looked at the other properties that the National Aquarium maintains and owns adjacent to their pavilions. The genesis of this was really to take that idea of all of those Chesapeake Bay ecologies, that go the whole way up to New York, and to represent them on their campus. So the slip was really representing the salt marsh. We also had a tidal marsh in there. There was an upland plateau, Appalachian Plateau, among others. And as we developed that, we started using imagery to kind of get fundraising, to get excitement behind this idea. And this is one of the images that we first did, which was before the project, what it looked like in that slip of water at the aquarium, and then imagining what it could look like. So it didn't take long for this, out of all the images from the Waterfront Campus Plan, for this to be the one that everybody loved and started saying that's the one that they wanted to implement. And when we originally designed this for as part of the planning exercise, a big commitment was made by the National Aquarium to have this be open and free to the public. So you can go on the learning dock without having a ticket to the National Aquarium. They do close it whenever the aquarium is closed, just for security reasons. But they also really wanted us to consider how we can use the public, walkways and access points that already exist in the inner harbor to allow people to see it even in the evenings when the aquarium is closed. So if you've ever been to the site, this is sort of that cable bridge that goes between the two piers that come out. And they intentionally wanted this to also be kind of viewed from that space as well, which still is part of the experience whenever you go there. Okay, so that's sort of phase 1 and 2. They did the prototypes for multiple years before us. They had a facilities plan for the interior conditions, and they had us look at the waterfront campus plan. At the very end of the waterfront campus plan, they asked us to do design drawings to allow them to install a floating wetland prototype. This was done in 2018, and then they did studies on this over 5 years that the project was on hold to inform our work. And it's hard to really talk about this project at all without giving recognition to the great team of scientists, designers even, at the National Aquarium that we worked with. And these are just two of the many people that helped work on this. Jack Cover, who recently retired, but was the head of their exhibits, and then Charmaine, who heads their conservation and continues to head their conservation. And I had their pictures up there because when you go to the floating wetland today, you may actually see them. They were very involved in our process too. This is a section like no other. So we, to explain to you the level of collaboration on this project between client and consultant, it is like nothing I have experienced, and it was great. We would go to meetings and Jack would have made sections like this. We did not draw this. Jack showed up. He is an animal guy, and he would show up with drawings of how he thought this would work. He had like little fish that he would transfer onto the section, and essentially the ideas that they had all learned through keeping animals alive in an interior aquarium are applied to this exterior environment. And it really was this sort of merging of us as designers and them as, animal care specialists to make this happen. I will never forget, once we showed up for a meeting and I walked in, I was the first one there, and Jack had in the middle of the room, of the conference table, he had brought I don't know how many gallon aquarium, and he's putting this little styrofoam model in this little, sort of like this air handler thing all going on. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a great meeting. And actually it was fundamental. And that's one of the ideas that's embedded into the wetland itself. So if you remember, I said that these old wetlands used to sink under their own weight. So a fundamental thing that they asked us to solve 3 things. One of them is to make sure that we create, a growing medium that would attract animals, aquatic and other. The second thing is that we would have clean water systems. So the roots and the presence of the vegetation do help with water quality, but the pace and the quickness that the water turns from good to bad whenever there's a weather event, it's usually whenever it goes from very hot to very cold overnight, it turns the water upside down in the harbor, and all of the sediment at the bottom of the harbor comes up and it depletes the oxygen. And that's what causes the fish kill. And so in order to combat that, we use those, what they had learned through their background in aquariums, which is we are actually bringing in oxygen through a filtration system. So there's aeration that is happening in this adjacent to and within this project. And then the third one was make sure this doesn't sink. And the way that we accomplish that is by building the floating wetland on top of pontoons. So the pontoons, they really act like a pontoon boat. Right now they're filled half with water, but as it gets, heavier, they will bleed out some of the water and get more air in, and it'll just pop it up. So, that was in the water for 5 years. It was greatly successful. They immediately saw the channel within the prototype was inundated with killifish whenever they first submerged it. It's pretty awesome video that I still have on my desktop at the office, because it kind of told us all that these species existed in the harbor, but they never had a place to go to. And there was never an easy way to kind of see them and for people to view and to see them. But from the successes and lessons learned on that, we kind of took this and amplified it to be a much larger scale. For a lot of our work, we start with establishing, planning principles with our client, and the aquarium very much does this as part of all of their exhibit designs. And the two goals that were established for them were promoting urban conservation and being a social and civic anchor. So promoting urban conservation was, again, this idea of cleaning the water quality so that it would increase the ability for the aquatic life to live there, as well as to draw other creatures in to live on the wetland as well. And then to be a social space and a civic anchor. This quote here is from some research that the aquarium does. They do surveys sometimes whenever you go to site. And it's from somebody who thought that based on their experience of coming to this destination at the harbor versus just a place that had a bunch of stores. So that was pretty satisfying for us all to hear. And, this is a long time for me just to talk. So I'm going to take a second here to go through a quick video that it's the National Aquarium in their own words, talking about what their vision was and what they were excited about for this project happening.
I'm excited for people that would not make a great face when there's a lot of like the animals that we one exciting part of it is having village coming all the air. It's like it actually plays that
So one thing to note in that video is, if you noticed in some of the construction images that the water was changing color pretty dramatically. It's those times when it looks kind of green or when it looks kind of red. That's whenever there's an event that is depleting, like that is taking oxygen out of the water. That's what it looks like. So, with that as the vision, we went to the, to the drawing boards, and we came up with a solution that embedded kind of those principles that met their budget, which I will say changed after COVID because, well, the budget remained the same, but the cost of construction changed dramatically before and after COVID, which is when this project picked back up again. And so the ultimate size of it shrunk to meet the budget. But we still feel really good that, this accomplished many of their goals, including the ability to really send this confirmation message and education to the people that are visiting their campus every day. So those were some renderings that we did, but here you can see it from way up high and how it sits between the two pavilions and how it's adjacent to that cable bridge that I showed you in an earlier drawing. And if you also look at everything else in the water, there's nothing green on a water's edge. It's all, either land-based or just plain water. So this really was the first living, ecology that was brought back to the inner harbor. And hopefully it's just the first. As I mentioned, this definitely brings public open space to the project, and it's kind of embedded in this message of conservation and urban green infrastructure. They have programs whenever you go out there. Periodically, the volunteers and the education staff from the aquarium will be on the wetland, talking people through, showing examples. Sometimes, it was designed so that they can open the gate, go down, they get some of they have nets, they get some fish, put it in a tank out there and show you what they found. And so, as designers, that's really satisfying to see like the goal and the vision come true. I told you before the kind of those three things that they asked us to solve, and related to kind of the long-term buoyancy so it didn't sink. This is just a sort of in construction drawing, as well as our own little axon that explains that pontoon system. So each of these little, it was designed so that it could be made off site and shipped in, because there's very limited place for a construction site there. So they had all these rafts brought in, and each one of those little squares kind of clicks together like a great big sort of matrix. And every single one of them underneath it has two pontoons, basically. So it has this system that's, they can add the water to, and they can raise and lower it. And that is what is keeping it afloat now. They adjust it. Whenever it was first planted, they had it sitting really low in the water so that it would all get irrigated, and then they brought it up as the roots grew from these plugs. This is kind of looking at it from the top, and you can see some of the other systems that were integrated into it. These sort of long bars are called reserve buoyancy. And so the pontoons keep will help it as it gains biomass and kind of keep it up like a boat. But the reserve buoyancy, the easiest way for me to explain this is it's kind of like an inner tube or a raft. So it allows it, if a big storm came and, made part of this whole system kind of tilt and get like underwater, it allows it to have the ability to pop itself back up, as opposed to flipping over and having the pontoons at the top. And a big part of keeping the water healthy enough for aquatic life is this, again, that technology from their backgrounds in aquariums, and it is bringing aeration into it. So there are two methods of aeration. One of them kind of goes down low and has bubbles that come up on the sides. And the other is aeration at the surface level of the stream that kind of goes through the middle of the wetland itself, and it pushes water through it. That image on the left is of that sort of meander in that stream that goes through the wetland. And we know that this has worked because during a fish kill event last summer, they were seeing more crabs. And I didn't understand why. I was like, well, why would you just see more crabs? And they said, well, crabs are bottom dwellers. And so they couldn't survive at the bottom because there wasn't any water there. And this, as Jack told me, he's like, so the smart ones figured it out and they came up here, and people were amazed because they saw so many blue crabs. But he knew that as soon as the rest of the harbor sort of, came back to a healthy condition, that they would kind of go back to their locations, which they did. But knowing that it's kind of like this point of refuge for them in those conditions is really exciting. And this is an image of the wetland before it was sunk, whenever they were building it. So you can see all those little rafts, those little rectangles that all click together. It also shows you the, you can see kind of like a bunch of tubes. There's a very complicated, I would say as a landscape architect, I never thought I would work so much with an with a mechanical engineer. But there is a very complex system of air running through this, not just for the aeration, but also connecting the pontoons. And all of that spaghetti kind of is happening underneath the water, and it's also happening in the wetland plantings themselves. But the grasses help to cover that up a little bit. Another interesting thing to point out from this view is that although when you go there now, it looks like a bunch of different islands, it's really one big island that is submerged. So the employees at the stream or that middle meander, because there is a structure underneath them, even though to you and I going there, it's not apparent. It just sort of looks like a stream that's happening. And this is an image of, again, Jack and Charmaine, they're always there. They have continued to do water quality testing. They're hoping that they will have kind of some more of their findings and data to share at the end of the summer after a whole year of doing it. You know, they had already done it for 5 years on the small prototype, so they're expecting it. And based on everything they're seeing with the animals, they think it's working well. And Jack is showing you kind of where all the manifolds were. So the manifolds allow the National Aquarium to adjust like the amount of air that's going through for the aeration, the stream flow, and the pontoons themselves. We hid those inside the benches. So you now know something. If you go there and you sit on one of the benches, know that hidden behind you on 2 of those benches, they have like a special key that unlocks, and it's all the equipment that runs the thing. So. And it should always be locked. So if it's not, tell them. And then the third thing that they asked us to solve for, again, was having the habitat. And the habitat comes from both what's a healthy water system, as well as having vegetation in which of the plants. And so the vegetation is grown in what's called PET. And PET is like a rigid sponge. It kind of reminds you almost of like a soft SOS pad. And if you think about that, that has holes in it. But if you put an SOS pad in your in your sink, it's going to float because it has enough air in it. And so it inherently floats itself, but it has these added methods of the pontoon system and the reserve buoyancy to make sure it continues to float over time and even in a weather event. And another good thing to point out here in this image is the 2 different colors of green. We had high marsh and low marsh grasses planted, and just the way that they came from the nursery, some of them were, doing better than others. They have all sort of kind of bounced back to be green, but it lets you see how I know that the ones that are a little bit more brown are kind of the high marsh, and the other ones are lower and down closer to the water, the low marsh grasses. And the other thing that has happened that at first was done, for aesthetic purposes, it is the addition of oyster shells. So, oysters, many of you probably know that oysters naturally clean the water. And there are lots of they call them biohuts all around Baltimore's Inner Harbor, where they have like a cage of oysters, they put them down, and then they bring them up and they do testing all about it. And they've been doing that for years. There was not, as part of this budget or in original vision, the idea of having a bunch of oysters in there. But when we saw what that stream looked like with the fiber grate, good old Jack got to thinking and thought, he's like, well, I know, we can at least get oyster shells. And the oyster shells themselves kind of get, stuff growing around them and little tadpoles and stuff like to tuck in and out of them. But then that, of course, grew to the next thing, that now they are putting spat on the shells and putting it into the wetland itself. And there are live oysters that are there. And we don't know if they're going to last more than a season or not, but they're continuing to do that. And at the end of last fall, they still had live oysters within there. And I think a big, we can say that the project was successful from our perspective as humans. But the real sort of sign of the success of the wetland is if the animals choose to come there. And they have had, a lot of species shown up. It was that image in the middle is like a night cam of a river otters that they caught on their wildlife camera. And just today I was talking to our client and she told me that this past week during daylight hours, multiple times the river otters have shown up and that people are just amazed. My response to that was I'm going to have to work remotely from there tomorrow so that I can see the river otter in daylight. But so that's been a real sign of success. And I do want to credit the National Aquarium for sort of like realizing this. And in their words, they have described the collection of animals that they have within the aquarium is for education and conservation purposes, but they have taken those animals out of their natural habitat and have them on display for our benefit. The difference with this exhibit is that it completely flips it. Here they have, and inside they have built an exhibit that tries to emulate the conditions that they took the animals from. And this exhibit flips it. It creates the space and the habitat for the animals. And then it's the animal's choice to come or go from this exhibit, which is kind of a nice way to think about it. And I think in that video of the client sort of vision and test and what they wanted to hope to get out of it, that you saw some of the images of how they managed this construction. But at a very high level, it was not easy. The Inner Harbor does not have a lot of lay down space. So they did it all off site and kind of put it together. That PET, that sort of rigid growing material that we talked about, we had different sized pieces that were all cut off site that then there was almost like a giant jigsaw puzzle that was put together by the contractor on site whenever it came. And this again was all in a way to kind of keep costs down too. The original prototype was laser cut and had really natural forms and everything was different. But this one, we realized that we did not have the benefit of a budget that could stretch that far. So how could we make it feel the same and just be done in a more economical way? So this is a view from above. They brought this crane in. If you've ever been to the aquarium, between Piers 3 and Piers 4, you walk in that kind of covered bridge that goes between them. They had to get a crane underneath that bridge. That was probably one of the biggest issues that they had to deal with. So they waited for a low tide and they put that thing down as low as it could get and just squeaked it on in there. And from that, they were able to start the construction and then they drove the piles there. The piles were a big challenge during construction as well because the Pier 4 pavilion houses dolphins. And dolphins are some of the most sensitive to animals to sound, and sound carries through water. So we tried to remediate that, and they drilled these piles. So I don't know if any of you have been around like construction sites that are close to water, but you hear them like hammering these piles. It's like that, like this constant ding over and over again. It's enough to drive somebody who does not have sensitive hearing crazy, let alone an animal that's living, right next door to it. So the way that was remediated was through something called a bubble screen that sort of that allows it to be released into the air versus traveling through the water. So that mitigates it a little bit. But the real way that it was dealt with, it was a very close relationship between the CM and the curator of the dolphins. And they had, and I'm going to get this number wrong, but it was well over 1,000 text messages back and forth every day. How are the dolphins doing? We're going to, pound the piles now. And like to find out if the individual animal was in the right state of mind in order to be able to accommodate that. And so that's a real shout out to Whiting Turner, that was the CM on this, that they had the, that they had the rigor to do that, to really make sure that the adjacent animals were healthy. And this is a picture just to show those where some of that aeration comes together on the site. There's a lot of tubes and stuff you don't see there. If you go to the site, you're seeing probably 1/3 of the project. The really hard part is the 2/3 that's underwater. The part that made us all wonder, should we have been engineers versus landscape architects, is the 2/3 that was underwater. And, you know, finally, I think one of the things that we did want to highlight is that this was a project that the National Aquarium brought to Baltimore. It's free of charge, and you know, the involvement and connection to the community was a big driving factor here. They had community members. They had a window of time where you could sign up to plant the harbor wetland, and like we were so excited because as the design team, we got to go there for a couple hours. But I can tell you, those spots went fast. People had been seeing this like being built over the course of 6 months, and they were ready to like hop on getting one of those open spots to kind of come in and plant. This also highlights some of the plant material that was included in there. And you saw, I think, in the video that it came as sort of plugs, all of those marsh grasses. So we have kind of like a low marsh and a high marsh grass. Then we have 2 primary shrubs. There might have been a third one that was included. We aren't 100% sure because they were negotiating what was available at the nursery. But they have groundsel bush and the marsh elder. We aren't sure if bayberry was or was not included. And it over 1,000 volunteer hours, and those lucky 358 people that got to plant the wetland itself. So when we kind of step back and look at it, you know, the project had a significant budget of 14 million. The project timeline that says 14 years, and that's really from the beginning of the waterfront campus plan. That's not including all of the prototyping they did prior to that, which brings that number up a little bit more. You know, it's 10,000 visible, you know, square feet of wetland, but the project area, there's another almost twice as that, 18,000 total that's kind of hidden from view of what you can see. And you know, a big part of this is really that it is open and free to the public. I forgot to push this. So this is a video of the security camera at night that first saw the river otters. So the project is still under construction here, but it's just kind of cute to see them rolling around. So you can see like a drop clock. Somebody's very definitely working on this project. And I mean, apparently they're still there, but this is kind of the team that we worked with. So we were prime landscape architects. Whiting Turner was the CM. I know they're so cute, like when they run across and stuff. Like that's my favorite part. It's like chasing each other. And we also had a special, we had a special team of construction person that does all sort of coastal work. So they were very heavily involved with it. We had marine engineers, we had mechanical engineers, structural engineers, civil engineers, as well as like really working very closely with the National Aquarium. And they had an owner's rep that they worked with as well. But for all of those of you in the design fields, you know, complex team, as most of your projects probably will be. So that's all that I have for you today, and I welcome any questions. And it's while I do that, because I just can't resist a good video, I'm going to, oh, is this not working? Nuts. I have to do this a different way. I was going to put a little video in the background of the wetland just so that you can kind of get a feel for what it, oh, it's still not working. Well, we don't need that. That was just a bonus. Here, let me see if I can just go back. But I welcome any questions that you might have. Yes?
So because the soil itself is kind of controlled by the structures, how do you regulate the soil health? Since it's not like understood kind of structure.
So it is, interestingly, it's not growing in soil. It's growing in that rigid sort of PET that is that sponge-like, that it looked like the kind of those big black pieces that were the puzzle pieces that we kind of put together. That's what it's growing in. And if you think about it, forcing a root, you know, they put the plugs in there and the roots just went down to the water. So they're growing and are able to get the nutrients that they need to survive from the water. And of course. So that's how that there is no soil. So that answers that question. Yeah.
You said with in preparation with course I was curious on trees because I was able to see a little deeper during storms that it doesn't get to like there's a upper and there's high winds. So it stabilizes the graphic more or raise it up a little bit more.
They have the ability to do that. I don't believe that they have done that. The biggest concern with the storm is actually the shade structures. And so they have been engineered in order to certain hurricane level, which every building, in this area is. But there has been not a hurricane, but I feel like we got the rain effects from a hurricane since this was under construction. And the inner harbor actually floods in those events. And there was a point where those walkways, those gangways that are going down to the learning dock actually were going up. So this area here all had, a couple inches of water, but our project was dry because it was on, it's floating and it just like kind of rises with the tide. Yeah. Both the dock and the wetland themselves kind of rise with the tide. Yes?
I was like students based on
I mean, I think that taking what you've learned from this and taking it to your future career, 100% yes. The other way I think to support something like this, if it's this particular project, is like trying to go to the National Aquarium and work for them in a volunteer capacity, which they 100% have. And I would say another way to support a project like this is sort of sharing what you've learned here with people that have, affiliated interests and things like that. I don't know if that answered your questions, or if there are other things. Yes?
What do you think like this type of projects? The other one is the first prototypes were like 470.
Yeah.
So it was much more.
Yeah. It was designed for 20 to 30 years. We actually suspect that they might have to go back and replace the wood. It's Kebony, which if anybody knows, that's like an engineered wood. It's more sustainable than using an exotic wood. But we think they're going to have to replace the wood on the learning dock before they have to do the superstructure. We think they might want to replant some of the plants. If they get too overgrown, they are kind of cutting them back annually. Actually, if you go there right now, they're supposed to cut them in the spring. So I'm guessing it might look a little naked for the next month, but then it'll kind of regrow itself. So it's supposed to have, the life expectancy of a building, essentially. So, yeah, one more and then I'll go over here.
So it was built modular.
Yes.
So does that mean you expand upon it?
Yes. You could expand upon it that every single one of those systems would then have to be replicated because there's not enough pontoon, there's not enough aeration to support more growing media or anything like that, but it definitely could be expanded. And in fact, there is one part that they are considering expanding in the next, I think the next 4 to 5 years. I don't know where they are in that time frame. Part of getting the permitting for this project was challenging because it doesn't fit into a neat box of following any rules or of anything. And so we ended up going and getting a joint permit application that is from the Army Corps of Engineers and Maryland Department of the Environment. So that's why it's joint. It's the two of them. And one of the things that we changed between the waterfront plan and this plan was the addition of the shade structures. And per current regulations, you are not allowed to have shade or anything that blocks the sun from the water beneath it. And they had approved all of the wetland and the learning dock because that was beneficial to this conservation method. But when we went back and asked for the shade structure, they were not pleased with that. So there's one part of this, I can point to it here. The shade structure in all these other areas is over kind of what was already approved or land. But down here, there's a small, like 2 feet that is over the water itself. And so they're going to come back over time and add wetlands there for their agreement for this application. Yes.
So when you went there, in March, there was a sound system, and I was wondering if you could tell us more about like the sound design into.
Yes. So the National Aquarium, even whenever you walk into their front plaza to go into Pier 3, like all of their whole campus has always had like a soundtrack associated with it. And you go into the aquarium, you know, you're moving through music the whole time whenever you are. This particular sound system was designed by the aquarium did this with a different group of composers. And it was designed specifically to reflect what is happening on that project. And it changes. And I don't want to get this wrong because there is a sign there that interprets it, but I believe that it changes based on what's happening in the water. So, but it is part of their experience is to use sound as a mechanism of interpretation. So like kind of fully immersing people in it. I learned a lot that I didn't learn. I don't know anything about how they designed or composed the music.
So on the other side for expanding the small scale, is this something that a lot of these places that
It 100% can be done at a smaller scale. And in fact, because this is kind of a unique version with the pontoon system and the aeration, the National Aquarium has applied for a patent. So they are patent pending right now. And they're currently working and talking to folks in New York City who were interested, as well as we met with a group that was on the West Coast, but it might not apply as much in that particular client's environment. So that is the intention, that this would both kind of that conservation method, solving the problem outside their front door, but also as an opportunity for people to do this or things like this at a smaller scale elsewhere. Yes.
you mentioned that we call it
Yes.
so you know the longevity of that itself.
So that is something that if it were exposed to sun would not have a long life, but there's so many details of this that even though I talked so much, I did not go through every detail, but each of those kind of puzzle pieces was spray coated with a solar, like a kind of like a plasticky film that was a solar barrier in order to increase the lifespan of the PET. That in combination with the plant cover, they think it is going to outlive, that will last longer than in that time frame that I talked about. So. Yeah, it's replaceable too. I will say that they have the prototype also has PET that was done. There are not a lot of people that make this in the world. And the manufacturers that did the prototype were no longer in business when we did this project. So we went with a different group. But there are still about 3 in the US that are able to make this product. It is made by a company that makes sponges. I mean, that is what it is like. If you look at it and touch it, it feels like this huge sponge, but it's made out of, like this rigid material. It's not squishy like a sponge is. So I'm hoping it doesn't get to that, but if it does, they would be able to replace those. Yes.
Again, you chose with the overhead panel, how the shoreline of that river is just completely changed. Why is it gone? Usually, it almost seems like it's eroded or seed, but why is that one gone?
It's been built into. So there are probably many reasons I'm not going to get right. Some of it, I know that under some of the piers, in fact, under Pier 4, some of it is rubble from the fire in Baltimore that at that point they just like put into the water. So like we had to have divers go down and scan the ground of the harbor there, because it's not like the piers necessarily went down and were touching the right stuff, or like that and all the condition underneath the promenade all over Baltimore City is different everywhere. And it's because over time there have been piers that have been built out there. They, this thing with the fire, it's just man has filled in the waterway itself.
And then going off of that, you mentioned like current potential plans and like how it could be on the scale, but do you think that a design like this would become the standard in a place like the Baltimore Harbor where one has been built in instead of creating little shorelines?
I think that the challenge with a project like this is that the cost per square foot is astronomically higher than planting a living shoreline. Maybe over time, that price could be, it could continue to be like sort of figured out how it can be manufactured in a way that's more affordable. So I don't know if it can be the standard right now, because, this is the National Aquarium. They spent $14 million to build this. I don't know that a lot of places would spend that much money to build this. I hope that they would want to do that even as an education component. But I mean, it's certainly that the mission was to allow it to be exported elsewhere. I do think that people would always probably try to do a living shoreline first, just because the cost is not even comparable between the two. But this is the only way that you can get an ecology in a place that has a hard edge like that. You'd have to build off the edge. I mean, at the beginning of this project, we were talking about hanging things from the side of the water. Or I mean, we kind of went all around. There was a lot of stuff that we talked about in those 14 years. So, yes.
I understand and I understand the variation and all. So then, has that fixed that problem with that in the water?
For that specific slip, yes, it has, like, it allows them to have a place to kind of go to, and they have not had, like, whenever you saw the fish everywhere else, they haven't had it in that location. Part of it is because it's at the bottom of the slip, and the way that the water kind of flows, it's not like pulling up into the slip. But the fish are not dying around there, which is a big bonus. Obviously, it's the goal. Yes.
So you mentioned permitting. How does this play with like Baltimore City water use restrictions, like boating, fishing? Especially if you're not doing the fish bills, I'm assuming people are going to want to fish here if it's want to fish.
So I'm going to try to go back to the picture that I was sharing earlier. Oh. So they have it, we actually had to add this little buoy on the edge, because even though, you saw those pictures of how it's this big structure that sunk down, kayakers did not realize where the edge of this was. And the CEO of the National Aquarium was out looking at the project in his kayak, and he got it stuck on that sort of lower. So that's sort of one thing that they have actually added on one side. Yellow is, if you go there, like the designers in the room, yellow is kind of like the pop color of all the furniture and the accent. So that's why we used yellow there. And also because it's a clear do not come here thing. So that was 100% added. The slip itself actually did not have any. In Baltimore City, there are designated, I don't even remember what they're called, but it's where you can talk to the dock master and you can buy like the right to dock your boat there. And there wasn't one here. So that was not an issue. They have not had any, it's interesting you say that about fishing, because we didn't even talk about that. I cannot believe we didn't talk about that with the client. And then we have no fishing signs. I think that we would ask, they would they have it stacked. So if they saw somebody fishing, they would ask them to, go somewhere else. Because it would actually be dangerous to fish there because your line would get stuck in all of that grate underneath there. Maybe that's also why people aren't fishing there. This was designed, and one of the changes from the plan to the implementation of the project is that it used to be kind of wider in the slip, and then we had to pull it back a little bit because if you've ever been to Baltimore and seen the trash boat go and it kind of scoops up all the trash, it goes up the slip still. So we needed to keep a right of way for the trash truck to go up there. Because that pedestrian bridge exists kind of to the north of the site, very few boats ever go up, like big boats never went up there. So that was kind of to our benefit in this location too. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much, Mel, for your talk to what a spectacular project, really exciting. And it's always cool when you see all the wildlife. You don't typically get a project and get to focus on that part of it. I want to thank the Environmental Center and the Super Science Club for kind of collaborating with this event, and obviously all the wonderful students. If you're here and not on Zoom, there's a nice smell in this room because there's some refreshments in the back. So thank you, Tammy in particular, for getting that to come together. Enjoy. Thank you, Amel, for your expertise and sharing this wonderful project. And I haven't been out there, so I look forward to getting out there. So thank you all and have a good evening.
And I'll also say, if you